The book that you've suggested is Power and Prediction. It's a book about how AI is going to affect us.
These things hit the scene with a sort of, this is going to change everything. The world will never be the same. And this is a silver bullet solution to all of your business problems. And that's almost never true in the short term and almost always true in the long term. Technology is an amplifier, not an antibiotic. If you put really good technology on top of really bad processes, all it does is accelerate how bad those processes are. Digital transformation, I think, is putting the technology at the center of the solution and the design of the solution. What would my organization look like if I built it from scratch today?
Welcome to the Non-Fiction Book Club. I'm your host, John Bradshaw, and we have a great show for you today. A big thank you to our season sponsor, Innate. Innate is the platform for financial advisors who want to spend less time on paperwork and more time helping their clients solve problems. You can find out more at innate.co.za. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter to be the first to hear about interviews, book reviews, and get great discounts on every book we cover. Sign up at www.nonfictionbookclub.com. And now our show. I'm very excited to have Mike Stopforth with us today. Mike, wonderful to have you here. Mike Stopforth has been thinking about digital and doing digital transformation since before you were playing Snake on your Nokia 3210. Founded Cerebra in 2006, one of South Africa's first digital agencies. Sold it to WPP in 2013, kept running it until 2018, and really responsible for bringing so many big South African companies into the digital age in your role there. Since 2018, it feels like you've had 20 different lives. You founded Beyond Binary, helping digital transformation. You became one of South Africa's most sought after keynote speakers. You co-founded 48 Hours, the social media crisis consultancy. You've got a wonderful podcast, One-Eyed Man, that I love. You founded a jiu-jitsu studio. You've just founded a digital agency called Second Rodeo, which is already pulling in some big clients. And then you also have published a great book, which we're going to talk a little bit about, 52 Big Questions for Business Leaders, sitting right here. But I'm so excited to have you discussing the book we have today because you have been thinking about these issues of digital transformation that are now hitting many companies with AI. You've been thinking about them for a long time. You've been working with companies, wrestling with them. So brilliant to have you here. Thank you so much for being on the Non-Fiction Book Club, Mike.
So John, as a Non-Fiction Book Club fan and associated member, super stoked to be here. And then just as your friend, like if I could take John Bradshaw energy and bottle it, I don't think I would have had 20 lives after Cerebra. I'd be a billionaire. So yeah, it's a privilege to be here. It's a privilege to be a part of this podcast, and I really can't wait for the discussion.
Brilliant. Okay, so today, the book that you've suggested we discuss is Power and Prediction by Ajay Agarwal, Goldfarb, and Joshua Gans.
Which you've digitally rendered.
Digitally rendered. Not the easiest book to get hold of. You can get the audio book, and you can also from exclusive books get it off their website. But what's interesting about this book is that it's a book about how AI is going to affect us, but it's written before the generative AI hysteria. So it was published in 2022. So it's so interesting because many of the excellent points have been lost in the noise a little bit. So I think it's going to be great to look at it. But I mean, maybe to kick off, where were you in your journey when you first came across this book?
Yeah, thanks, John. So I, when I left Cerebra, had quite a few questions about what I wanted to do next. And I'm fascinated by leadership, and I'm fascinated by the intersections of technology and leadership and how it seems consistently and repeatedly hard for big influential organizations to deal with technological change. And you know, my thesis was that's a function of leadership more than anything else. And I was like, seems to be a chasm between the people who are talented engineers and builders of amazing tech solutions, and then the people that pay them to make the tech solutions. And I was like, how do we narrow that gap? And I thought the answer to that was digital literacy. And so Beyond Binary was really a solution around how do we up the ante on the level of maturity in digital literacy at the highest levels of organizations, but not necessarily in a like, I now need to code, or I don't have to own cryptocurrency, and maybe I don't have to be on Twitter all day long, but there is a foundational level of capability I should have, and we could argue is negligent not to have if I'm going to be a strategic decision maker at the highest level of those businesses. Yeah.
And that feels like it's even more so now in the world we've lived in, where the sort of self-serve AI tools mean that executives don't even need to code, right? They could be vibe coding and doing all kinds of things, but the basic understanding of the technology that they're using is the starting point for any sensible decision there.
1000%. So I really efficiently managed not to answer your first question by telling you where I was but what got me onto Power and Prediction was a 3-part series, the Freakonomics podcast, which I know you also love, I love. And the title of that was How to Think About AI. And I loved it because it wasn't necessarily what to do with ChatGPT or how to get the most out of the latest 4 tools in generative. It was, how do I think about this technology? And that had been the sort of defining question for me around all other emerging digital trends and technologies, because it almost always feels like these things hit the scene, whether it's NFTs or blockchain or social media before that, or any number of combinations of those tools, with a sort of, this is going to change everything, the world will never be the same, and this is a silver bullet solution to all of your business problems. And that's almost never true in the short term, and almost always true in the long term. And so I've developed a bit of an allergy to that kind of AI guru type appears in the moment of the new technology and goes, this can change everything, and a dire lack of maturity underneath that around, but why did it happen? How is it important for my business? What is the impact on knowledge and people and data and connection and relationship? And then what does that mean from a decision-making perspective? And I gravitated towards thinking and experts and podcasts and books that looked at the fundamentals of computing as a exponential force for change in our lives, as the best way to understand how to think about the tools that were on the bleeding edge of technological change. I hope that answers that.
I think it's so great, because I think one of the mistakes I see a lot of people making is in that thinking about AI, they apply thinking that works as thinking about Excel or thinking about, CRMs, or it's that same, they say, oh, this must be a new type of that, where it seems completely different, and its second order effects are so hard to predict. So I think let's definitely make sure we come on to that. I guess maybe we should, most people listening aren't going to have come across this book. So won't you help our listeners by taking us through sort of the major thesis of the book a little bit?
Yeah, so I was really interested in reading Power and Prediction because I followed Ajay's work from ages ago, even the emerging Silicon Valley Web 2.0 gold rush. I always found him to be one of the more lucid and sensible thinkers in the middle of all of the craziness. And so when I saw that he was, that this book was the result of a partnership between him and Joshua's work is work that I followed, but probably on a more superficial level. Love some of his talks, and I've listened to his podcast as well. I gravitated towards the book because I wanted a more academic, more infrastructure focused resource that would enable me to build a really solid foundation around understanding the technology better, but not in such a way that I had to necessarily sign up for a 3-year degree to gain that engineering level depth and understanding. I've always, I think, had an innate sense of how to translate technological complexity into manageable metaphors or comparisons or examples for my corporate clients. And so I thought that if I'm going to be doing that for generative AI, I really need to build a solid technological insight base. And this book was the best version of that. So the thesis of the book really is that the best way to understand the economics of AI is understanding the foundational drivers behind computational change. So if you can understand the exponential forces behind processing power, storage capacity, bandwidth and connectivity. And then you can draw comparisons between how that exponential change in computational capability is comparable to things like our discovery of electricity, and how society and business and politics and people responded to those changes. Then you can make much smarter choices about how to incorporate these tools in the ordinary day-to-day strategic focus of business.
And I think what's so interesting in having that historical view and looking at something like electricity is it's really useful how they unpack the different types of solutions that then emerge. This idea of point solutions, which emerge quite quickly, and then there's application solutions, and then I think it was system solutions that that come up there. Do you want to help us unpack those a little bit?
So I'm going to do that, but by stealing liberally from Tom Goodwin, who's another author I love, wrote a great book called Digital Darwinism, and is one of the better thinkers in the realm of digital transformation. And then I'm also going to borrow from a book that I was introduced to probably 15 years ago now, called The Victorian Internet, which was, and I can't remember the author, but The Victorian Internet was a look back at the introduction of the telegraph into society over a 40-year period, and how we could draw comparisons between how people responded to the changes off the back of the telegraph, changes in communication, again, politics, society, relationships, and the introduction of the internet, and how it was happening at a different rate, but the similarities were astounding. And I think in many ways you could draw lines between the Victorian internet and power and prediction in many ways. Okay, so Tom Goodwin's discussion around how we harnessed and incorporated electricity as a primary source of power and production at the height of the industrial age was, he used the analogy, or at least used the example of, if we have any Peaky Blinders fans listening to the podcast, thinking about that kind of Birmingham, grimy, industrial age environment where most factories, most production capability had to be rooted to property that was either very close to a body of water because of the dependency on steam as a primary source of power, or railway lines where you could get ready access and cheap access to coal, or a combination of those things. So your geographical location became incredibly critical, and so people that had invested both in location and in the sunk cost to build out capability in those spaces looked at the emergence of electricity, and obviously it's important to mention we didn't invent electricity, we discovered, harnessed and made safe the use of electricity at scale. They looked at that as an incredible opportunity to drive efficiency, to introduce shift work, to make the environment safer and cleaner and less polluted for the people that were working in there. But instead of redesigning the way that the factory produced X widget, they simply pulled the steam turbine off the back and put an electric motor on, with all of the machines in series, off belts,
just
doing
like
the same job, 100%,
exactly.
but maybe a little bit quieter and a little bit quicker. Entrepreneurs who were unburdened by legacy thinking had the opportunity to look at what a factory might be like if we put electricity at the center of it, if we redesigned ergonomically in terms of engineering the way that we put machines together, the way that we had specialist operators who could be almost consulting level experts on this pod or this capability. It made knowledge workers more active in the process because now there was deeper level of specialization rather than observing a series of machines working together and waiting for something to go wrong. And so it was those people who disrupted the design of that capability, and I think really reinvented and optimized the way that those widgets were delivered, but at the same time also could look at different geographies and regions to build that, because you weren't necessarily so rooted to a body of water or a railway line.
Right.
And the similarities between that and how I see people incorporating even the most exciting technologies into legacy business infrastructure today are extraordinary, astounding. Most of us will look to, which I call digitization, will look to add layers of digital capability on top of existing business processes or operations, customer touchpoints or employee touchpoints to improve the experience and to save cost. And that works very often. In fact, I think the large majority of what people call digital transformation is just kind of digitizing, automation, really. Provided, this is a big proviso, the processes and systems that underlie that strategy are sound and already optimized and already working well. Technology is an amplifier, not an antibiotic. If you put really good technology on top of really bad processes, all it does is accelerate how bad those processes are, bad those experiences are. Right? Digital transformation, I think, is putting the technology at the center of the solution and the design of the solution. It's designing the new factory around electricity and all the possibilities that provides. And that's much harder to do when you are already deeply invested in a particular way of doing things. And that's why it's possible for an Airbnb to disrupt a very established hotel industry, or Uber to uproot the way we think about ride sharing or taxi services. And so, legacy becomes a big part of the conversation around innovation.
And it does feel like, I mean, the Airbnb is a great example because it shows there's clearly something that's hard for the existing corporates to incorporate it, because you have this process in the factory where maybe the first step is, like you say, the coal-fired engine gets replaced with an electric engine. The sort of middle maybe application changes when all the engines, there's a little motor put all around the factory, and then the system solution is the factory is completely reimagined. Why this just was an absolute epiphany for me is, having lived in large corporates for most of my career, I could immediately see why some digital change is easy and some digital change is almost impossible. So the first type of digital change, which you call digitization, is just you tell everyone it's your job to do your job better using these new tools. You can say it like, don't write me a bad email without putting it through spell check. Don't draft anything without asking ChatGPT if you could have written this better. Right? Doesn't change anyone's job, just makes them more efficient. The second one, the system solution, you have an executive accountability. So you say to your head of marketing, use these new tools. It's a little bit disruptive because you may have to not use an agency or use a different type of agency or reconfigure your team.
Or reject behavior.
And your team could end up looking quite different. But what's important is it doesn't change the power balance of executives within that corporate team. Because you still have marketing responsible for marketing, and sales responsible for sales, and buying responsible for buying, and operations responsible for operations. Within their area, they have an accountability. The third system solution is you reconfigure the factors of production. Right. So you might end up having a totally different executive team. You might have to give somebody that used to be your job, but we're giving it to them now. And that is very, very hard to do.
Little decentralized, fragmented battalions of capability that are autonomous and funded and coming together to solve problems.
That sort of links with this thought that organizations struggle to make changes that don't fit in the existing structure.
Definitely.
And that's really what I'm seeing in AI now. The best companies are saying, our base expectation, Shopify said this, our base expectation is everyone is learning how to do their job better using AI tools. Right? And for executives, that means leading your team. But the difficulty of rethinking about how you deliver the value you deliver to customers, because you now have those tools, that's an immense challenge, and most companies just can't even look at that. It's like looking at the sun. After a few seconds, gotta look away. Right, so prediction is in the title. One of the big theses in the book is that the cost of prediction, for those reasons you mentioned, with the lowering cost of chips and data and processing power and all those things. And really a lot of the book is, if prediction comes down, what does the world look like? Now it feels like that's pretty different to the narrative that exists now in 2025, where often people will say the cost of intelligence is coming down.
Byproduct of access to information, but
access to information. So do you still think this idea of this framing of it's the cost of prediction that's coming down, or do you think it's been superseded by it's the cost of intelligence?
No, I think they're related, and I think that it begs the question of what is the if that's true, which I think we can all agree is true, that it's in fact one of the really interesting trends that's come out of the the emergence and adoption of generative AI at scale is the re-emergence of prediction markets as a really interesting space. I remember people talking about prediction markets 15 years ago.
Yeah.
James Surowiecki wrote, interesting that his name would be Surowiecki, but he looked at things like wikis and went, what? The book was titled Wisdom of Crowds,
Yes.
was the wisdom of the crowd. What conditions need to be in place for a group of heterogeneous, unrelated, disconnected people to come up with a really smart solution, right? And so I think the question is really about wisdom and intuition, which is what I think we hope we retain or the role that we can play as humanity when these machines and the people using them are able to replicate the vast majority of prediction operations and information related operations, where essentially what we're talking about is a map from like data, insight, and then action, right? So like what role does intuition, wisdom, experience play in that mix? And so I think I like that. Your use of the word intelligence is really interesting because I think there's two parts to intelligence. It's the access to information and then understanding it and knowing how to use it, which I would argue is more on the wisdom side of things. But you'll know, I think a lot about this dynamic between the very best use of data science in our organizations, in our lives, even in our personal capacity, liberating the very best of what I've been calling domain expertise, which I think is a fancy way of saying intuition, wisdom, experience. And so that becomes an interesting byproduct of power and prediction as a platform for thinking about the role that AI will play now and into the future in business and in our lives. I worry that a lot of what we are asking AI to do now is to replicate some of the things that are best done when we create the space for domain expertise, for intuition, and for smart, intuitive thinking. But I get the sense that we are forgetting what jobs AI is best at and asking it to do the stuff that probably we should be asking humans to do, and vice versa. Still have a lot of humans doing the stuff that we probably should be relying on AI to do.
So I really don't like this idea of the intelligence is getting, like the cost of intelligence is going down, because I think it's too loose. Like you say, like what is intelligence? It's interesting, so much of what ChatGPT is using is almost the cost of a decent creative act, decent try. That's generative. A decent picture, decent writing, that seems to be coming down. What I loved about the book is I had missed the fact that it's also the cost of prediction that's coming way down. So the fact that my father knows the way everywhere, he can drive anywhere, and even on my daily commute, I use Google Maps. Because I want to know what time I'm going to come home, and I want to know, is there a shorter route just today? Is something happening? That's the cost of prediction that's gone way down, and therefore I've included prediction into my life. So I think it's going to be really interesting as we say, oh, what are the different costs that are coming down in this AI world, and therefore what activities now become viable? But I think your point that you're saying, there's wisdom and intuition. In the book, they talk a lot about how tasks are going to be separated into judgment and prediction, which I think is really interesting to say. In any role, you can fractionalize the role. There's all the bit that was just prediction, which is better done by AI, but judgment is going to stay. Is that something that
you've... Much better word than intuition, which I was wrestling with earlier on. Yeah, judgment.
But I think it's these intuition, wisdom, judgment, it's that sphere of things that we hope will be left. And this fractionalization of roles into prediction, or the stuff that AI does, is that something that you're seeing as you work with companies, or as you build your own company? Are you thinking about roles differently?
Yeah, so I want to use a corollary example, which is also like quite a hot topic in technology and information right now, that I saw happening in the early days of like the most disruptive days of social media. And as it's normalized its role in our lives, as I think that in the novelty around social media has disappeared, and what it actually is now settled into the fabric of society. Something interesting is emerging. So the big thing when social media happened, and now there was consumer generated media and anybody could publish on the internet, was what's going to happen to journalism? What's going to happen to, and what happened was like a decimation of objectivity, of really good fact-based news. In fact, news died. Partly because the incentives around how to monetize news and what people default to wanting to read and wanting to share, and that being the primary determinant of its value, shifted as well, right? So what that's done is not killed journalism. It's the classic video, kill the radio. So I think it's made good journalism possibly more valuable than ever before, harder to find, and maybe that's the biggest opportunity in the world right now.
And we haven't seen the end of that, right? It feels like that's still playing out. It feels like
that might be the thing that emerges. Now that for me is a really interesting corollary to the discussion we're having around the trade-off between prediction and judgment, is that there's this discussion around all of this access to information, my ability to process so much information very quickly with smart prompts and really great engineering results in just a much lower cost around the economics around prediction. What does that mean for the value of really great judgment into the future? And those people who are able to exercise really valuable judgment based on a combination of, like I said, circumstantial advantage, experience, intuition, and so on and so forth. I think it's really interesting. I think, like, what are the economics of judgment in the future if it becomes extraordinarily scarce
and leverage? You almost get the Mr. Beast effect, where there's going to be a small number of people that can have an extraordinary amount of influence because of their ability to leverage their judgment. I mean, it does give the challenge to us is how can we become good at the judgment, the intuition, the wisdom, when the ability to memorize, process, combine facts is a commodity.
Yeah, and I don't know if we've always thought about that, because they were one and the same thing. So like judgment was largely about being able to gather the right information. Judgment was about, I mean, if we think of the judicial system, it was really about evidence. So we've made evidence a commodity. But the evidence is not the advantage. The ability to exercise smart choices, assuming that everybody has access to the same evidence.
So I think the two things that companies will get then an advantage of is, can we be really good at judgment? Can we get really good at a system that takes all of the information and turns it into tools that our judges can use for judgment? And then can we have our own proprietary evidence that nobody else has access to? Because for those companies that can hold on to evidence, then I think what's really relevant about that is, Google, Meta, these are companies with huge proprietary evidence sets of our behavior. If you think of just what sits in YouTube, because of their, Google has access through YouTube. It's got an enormous amount of data that nobody else would have access to, that they can then use to apply to those models.
Let's imagine that becomes less and less valuable, or less and less of a differentiator. And I think the only thing that I would add to what are the capabilities of the organization of the future if they want to maintain a competitive advantage, assuming that that's even something important going forwards, is the ability to then mobilize people around that insight that comes with superior judgment, right? So how do you drive complex systems of people, which right now the vast majority of hierarchies, the traditional way of building organizations is incredibly complex and incredibly difficult. So that's where we started. And how do you mobilize people around that insight? How do you drive them to action? How do you get them speaking the same language that comes from that insight? I mean, I suppose the AI skeptics would go, what people?
Okay. But I think this I'm so interested, before we run out of time, I want to jump on this because mobilizing people for action sounds quite a lot like leadership.
Yeah.
Which is where we started the discussion. So, I mean, given your experience in watching good and bad leaders go through the invention of social media, the invention of e-commerce, the bubbles of crypto, and the invention of MarTech, and now AI, what is it that the best leaders do to lead their organization, to mobilize their troops?
We spoke about Airbnb early on, and when I talk about the Airbnb and hotel example, I go, the mistake that the hotel industry made was being really good at its job, highly competitive, deeply saturated, and ultimately, I think, losing sight of what problem they actually solved for people.
Yeah.
Because the obsession and sole focus of almost every major hotel group in the world was property acquisition and occupancy maximization. Yeah, just like it's a formula, and it's who can get the deal through the fastest and who can optimize that space for maximal occupancy. The problem that hotels solve for people is, when I'm not home, where's a safe place for me to sleep that is preferably clean and affordable? I mean, even those are optional. But that's the problem. The problem is, where can I sleep when I'm not home?
It's a job to be done.
That's the job to be done. The best leaders, I think, run organizations that grow and scale and innovate and improve and maintain relevance and competitive advantage without ever losing sight of this singular problem that they solve. What is the problem I solve for my customer? Second question, provided I can articulate that and everybody understands it, what are the most interesting, innovative, creative, and alternative ways to solve that problem? If we're doing that and we're winning at that, then of course, let's explore all of those innovations and creative and alternative ways to do that, because that's probably where the disruption is going to come from, because we forgot about it. But if we have maintained our focus on that problem, the only thing that should ever change that vector, the only thing that should ever move focus is customers no longer have that problem.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, then we need to reorient. Now, then you can pivot.
But whoever, I love this idea of falling in love with the problem, not in love with the solution. So I think that's so the whole. And actually, I think that might be one of your questions in here.
Yeah, I think it might be question number one.
In section number, what is the problem I solve for my customers? So I don't want to leave without discussing your brilliant book, 52 Big Questions for Business Leaders.
Thanks.
I've read it. I love it. All the questions are good. Is there, I mean, you can't use question number one because we've already referred to that. Is there another question in here that you think, when leaders are thinking about AI and the effect it's going to have on their business, is a really useful one for them to have in mind?
Yeah, my other favorite, and it is one that I, again, stole liberally from Tom, and I'm proud to say that I did mention that in the book, is what would my organization look like if I built it from scratch today? Which I think is a really helpful thought starter for abandoning legacy thinking, because if you expand that question to what are the similarities between the organization, the company that I would build, and the company that I have? What are the differences? And then I think the question that follows on is, what are the reasons for those differences?
Yeah.
You might find that there's very good reasons. And like I want to protect people's jobs. Great reason.
Yeah.
But the other reason might be, that's just the way we've always done it. We're comfortable there. Yeah, which, as we all know, is a cancer. I love that question. It's a great thought starter. There's a lot of great thought starters in there. And I think that asking those kinds of questions forces us into perspective in a way that normally we're uncomfortable doing.
Wonderful. Well, there are another excellent 50 questions in here, both about your organization and about your personal journey. So a brilliant book. Mike,
John,
thank you so much for being on the Nonfiction Book Club. Power and Prediction is a great book. If you want to get out of the hype a little bit and you want to get into really thinking differently about AI and getting your skeleton for thinking about AI right, this is a great one. But thank you so much for being with us, Mike. It was a brilliant discussion.
Thanks for having me on the show, John.
A big thank you to our headline sponsor, Innate. Next time you're talking to your financial advisor, ask them what platform they're using to manage the administration of your investments. If they say Innate, you can take comfort knowing they're using technology to work smarter and serve you better. Visit innate.co.za to find out more. A reminder to sign up to our newsletter to always be the first to hear about book reviews, interviews, and to get book discounts on great books from our book partners' exclusive books.